So welcome everybody to the British Interplanetary Society and to the launch of our UK space investment campaign. Just a few health and safety warnings. We're not planning a fire drill, so if you hear it, it's the real thing. There are two exits here, the door through which you came at the front, or if there's a fire at the front, exit through the back and through the car park gates. Our muster station is just down the road past down Vauxhall. The gents' loos are on the ground floor, ladies are upstairs. So we will be serving a light sandwich, lunch and soft drinks after the event. So with great pleasure, let me introduce Nick Spall. So Nick is chairing our investment campaign. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, John. It's down to me, sadly, to announce that we were hoping to have Brian Blessed with us today. Sadly, he was taken ill this morning. We hope nothing serious, but I'm sure we'd all wish him speedy recovery. And I'm sure in the future he'll be, once he's recovered, I'm sure he'll be joining us for the future with future events. But it's down to me also to welcome Dallas Campbell, who is looking very well indeed. And we should be entering a tumultuous mess. Oh, I'm sure it's not. You look very. And we're going to be talking, he and I will be talking, there's a fireside chat. Fireside sounds a bit strange on a day like today, but we can imagine we're in the winter and we'll have a good chat through Dallas and his career. Now, the task for me then is to give you a rundown on what this campaign is all about. I'm going to be talking for about a quarter of an hour on the background to the UK space investment campaign. The BIS, British Interplanetary Society, has had a long history, as we all know, as an advocacy organisation as much as promoting space generally. And we'd like to think this particular issue is highly important for the future for UK space as part of an international space effort. I'd like to tell you more about why we are where we are in terms of current UK space spending and, of course, what we'd like to see for the future. This is our strapline. We're asking the UK government to increase UK's civil space investment to at least double its current level by 2030. This will allow the UK to join the levels invested by comparable economies. I'll be explaining more about the comparison with the rest of the developed world. The UK then expanded its role in international space exploration, science, and, of course, utilisation, and then will properly support growth, security, and, of course, the key thing, highly skilled jobs. So that the message is more skilled jobs, national security, science and exploration, with, of course, inspiration. Now, a sort of elephant in the room is obviously the big question: what are we doing, telling government to double UK space expenditure when we're already in a bit of a pickle when it comes to UK defence? I mean, over the last few weeks, we've heard a lot about the Defence Investment Plan. We're 5 billion short of defence. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this. The BIS, by nature, is a civil organisation, a civil charity, a civil promoter of civil space. But inevitably, there are security matters that are part of space explorations, space science and space utilisation. So I'm afraid we can't ignore that. And it is possibly an area where the whole, if you like, investment campaign will touch on the issues of national security. The slide there includes an image that's second to the right, the satellite in orbit, a future UK satellite called Oberon, which is entirely homemade. This is giving the UK, if you like, sovereign reconnaissance capability to be launched in the next 2 years. It's what's called an SAR, synthetic aperture radar satellite, first of its kind for the UK. So it will be built and managed in the UK as an entirely sovereign system. Now that obviously involves UK space industry who are currently producing civil space satellites. And we'll talk more about how the two dovetail. The second, it's like third image along, is Artemis. Remember the UK, this is the American-led, NASA-led return to the moon. Remember the UK isn't particularly involved in Artemis, even though we've signed the Artemis Accords. Unlike the rest of Europe and countries like Canada and Japan, we are not formally part of any hardware as yet. But I'll be talking more about that in the next few minutes. And of course, the final slide, the image there, is inspiration, incredibly important for young people, encouraging science and technology jobs. The rest of the developed world does appreciate this, and they obviously use space as a great source of inspiration. So going back to the BIS and where the UK has got to and what we could have been doing. And part of this is a rather sad story, but it's also inspirational for the future. The BIS, as many members will know very well, goes way back to the early days, 30s, and formed in 1933. And there we see an image, a more recent image, of the BIS lunar lander study and the project that was first of its kind to seriously look how we get to the moon. This is way before Apollo and or Russian efforts to go to space. That was followed post-war by the idea of megarock, which again, R.A. Smith was part of that, part of the BIS initiative, a study of how one could suborbit a human being into space, space heights, using V2 technology with a capsule. Precursor to the NASA Mercury Redstone missions, the first 3 Mercury missions, which were almost similar in terms of rocket casting and the whole idea of doing suborbit space. Things were going well into the 1960s in terms of UK space industry. We had great ideas for launches. Now that image bottom left, BAC Mustard. Mustard was a 3-part reusable launch system that could have revolutionized the access to space way back in the 1960s. UK-led BAC, lack of funding. The story, obviously, is lack of funding means it didn't progress. Part of that, as many of us know, is the HOTOP initiative, which was a model of it in our reception area, which would have provided a reusable space plane launching into orbit, making terrific returns in terms of, if you like, cut price access to orbit. Again, a sad story of UK investment, space investment, that didn't progress. But we did move with the 1960s with Blue Streak, again, purely British, which was, I think there was 11 launches, all of them successful, led to a possibility of European launch using Blue Streak as the first stage. Again, sad story, the international involvement didn't work, and by the early 70s it was dropped as a UK-led initiative. And finally there, Black Arrow, a glorious story of orbiting a satellite, Prospero still in orbit with a UK light rocket, could have been launching 150 kilograms regularly into orbit, sadly cancelled 3 days before it actually launched Prospero back in 1971. So that, if you like, is a review of where we could have gone, which pretty much stopped in the 1970s in terms of launches and space exploration. But what we did do as a nation, we did carry on with a pretty successful satellite construction industry. companies like Astrium, SSTL, and then obviously EADS followed through, right through from the 70s, right through to current day. And top left, you can see we've actually got to the stage of having a national satellite testing facility at Rutherford Appleton Laboratory. We're producing, UK are producing satellites such as the Sentinel series of satellites, Earth observation, the second one along the left there. And then, of course, we've got Rosalind Franklin, again, UK built as a potential rover, probably going to launch 2028, involving what was going to be a Russian launcher, now a US launcher, through the European Space Agency. Far right, Rolls-Royce, potentially offering future radioactive power generation for lunar bases. And that's something that is a possibility. Received a little bit of Space Agency funding, UK government funding, but it's arguably it's not enough as yet. But that's something to watch for the future. Bottom left, again, a story of slow progress and delay, but that's an image of possible launches from Saxe aboard up in the Shetlands. Well behind schedule, of course. There's been a bit of government money put into it. Slow start, very British story. It hit planning issues early on. Historic Scotland, the organisation dealing with national monuments, noted that it's right on top of an old World War II radar installation, which is a scheduled monument, and there was a long saga of them not supporting the planning application. Took a year to change their mind, but at last there was a commission in place. Obviously, it's under construction development, and over the next 2 years, eventually there'll be a satellite launch, hopefully the first in Europe, from a UK spaceport. But the message is it should have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The French did it, developing Kourou in South America. The UK hasn't. Middle picture at the bottom is Moonlight. This is a SSTL initiative of orbiting communication satellites, data relay satellites around the moon. Again, potentially it could be part of the Artemis lunar return, but arguably it needs a lot more investment as part of a UK-led initiative. And finally, on the bottom right, the situation with UK-born astronauts, so UK astronauts as part of the European Space Agency. That's Rosemary Coogan, who is the career astronaut selected in 2022. She, if things went well, she would be getting an early flight to the International Space Station, hopefully a 6-month science research mission. Sadly, the situation is that, sorry to sound negative, but because of the lack of UK investment in human exploration, it's very limited. At present, she was probably going to be at the end of the queue, and she's got a long way. Possibly she'll fly via a private initiative. There's two running at the moment, Axiom and VAST, both of them private-led. Tim Peake is part of Axiom, and this is the idea that private research companies will help fund future science missions in private space stations. But at the moment, Rosemary is waiting, obviously busy as part of ESA structure, but unless the UK steps forward with more exploration funding, she's got a bit of a wait. There are, of course, two others. There's Megan Christian and John McFall, both reserve astronauts. John may stand a chance flying with the VAST private initiative. But again, it needs a huge amount of private money. And at the moment, there isn't the government support to push it forward. So this, if you like, is where we are. And this is the key issue that is at the heart of our UK investment campaign. These are the expenditure budgets of the civilian, and emphasize civilian, space agencies or nations across the world. The figures are 2022, but we understand they're pretty much the same as the 2025, 26 levels. And it's worth just getting if you like, the big impact of this. Obviously, America through NASA, on the top of the league, with China behind, about roughly half the American expenditure. Then we have ESA, the 7 billion for ESA, number 3. Japan, number 4 at 4.14. Russia is gradually slipping back. There's been a lack of Russian investment in space, apart from military space, over the last few years. Then we have Germany at 2.8. France, heavily involved, approximately the same amount as Germany. Obviously, French stories, they're very much focusing on launcher development. They do have the Kourou launch facility on the emerging Ariane variants coming through. But below them, we have India doing remarkable things for the amount. They're soon going to have a human spaceflight capability with their Gaganyaan spacecraft. Italy doing very well. The Thales Alenia company is heavily involved in Artemis. And finally, at number 10 is the UK. And it's roughly, in terms of millions, it's about 680 million expenditure last year. There was a small rise last year, but in terms of exploration funding, it's pretty significant. And then below us, South Korea and Canada. If we go over to the right, the red figures, that's looking at space budgets as a percentage of GDP. Look at where the UK is, right down the bottom, something like 17th. This is a percentage of our GDP that goes into space, way behind. And that's the problem of our campaign, if you like, what we're trying to redress and persuade government to change. Now, it's worth just looking at why the comparable economies are doing what they're doing, spending what they're spending, and what they get out of it. This is a few examples of French, German, Italian, and Japanese investments in space, particularly on the launcher side and the human exploration side. And on the top left, as I was saying earlier, Ariane. Now, Ariane 6, which is a very flexible system, not reusable yet, but it's if you like, on the way to future reusability. Very successful series of launches. And Ariane 6 will be seeking some of the medium and heavy lift capacity that's out there. The middle picture there, that's Orion, obviously went around the moon this year with Artemis 2, and to the left of it attached is the European Service Module, led by Germany. Bremen were at the heart of the EADS construction of a very complex service module for the Orion spacecraft. It means, because Germany, Italy and France put so much into it, it means that Luca Parmitano will be flying on Artemis 3 next year. So there'll be an Italian astronaut on board a NASA-led initiative for next year. And then down the line, there are 3 seats intended for European and one for Japanese access into lunar orbit and eventually lunar land. On the far right, Argonaut, which is an uncrewed lander, it's a cargo lander, which again, UK isn't fully part of at all, led by Italy, Germany and France. Bottom left, there's Sophie Adenau, French astronaut on board, currently on board the ISS, with Jessica Meyer, NASA astronaut. Again, she was head of the queue when it came to selection for a ISS mission. In the middle, the 2 German astronauts, Alexander Gerst and Michael Mora, both currently training for lunar landing practice and simulation in helicopters. They're actually doing what the NASA astronauts were doing back in the 60s as part of the early days of Apollo. So they're getting lunar landing training as astronauts already. And this again, means down the line that will have priority when it comes to seats on Apollo. Sorry, excuse me, Artemis, sister of Apollo. Then bottom right, finally, look what the Japanese are doing. It's a pressurized lunar vehicle that will be future part of the moon base, the Artemis moon base, and Japan, again, are pushing hard to get involved in Artemis. So that's, if you like, where the UK isn't involved. Some key points, apologies for all the heavy text, but some key points as part of our campaign. Studies by the UK Space Agency, this consultants called Novaspace, from last year, they found that for every £1 invested, £7 comes back to the nation's economy. And as I was saying earlier, UK, sixth largest world economy. I think we forget how well the UK is doing. 70 million people in the country now. Sixth largest economy. We're ahead of France in terms of gross GDP. Trillions, like 4.2 trillion. And yet our argument is, and yet we're not stepping up to invest in space by comparison to other nations. France, 2.5 times as much as the UK. Germany, Italy, spending twice as much. India, 1.3 times as much. But look what they're achieving with launches, human spaceflight, and probes to the moon and Mars. And our case is that as a result of this, we're missing out on apart from the industrial issues, we're missing out on all that inspiration that space offers. Obviously, the big question is, why is this what's going wrong? Why is the UK so negative when it comes to space investment? My view, our view, is that we have the wrong attitude as a nation, or as a government, to space. There is the dreaded Treasury-led view, and that's on the top left is Sir Humphrey Atherton, the character from Eastminster, as Prime Minister, who obviously, he never talked about space in the TV series, but you can imagine what he would have said. That there's this belief that space is full of vanity, prestige. It's a waste of God's resources, and we have more pressing needs that need investment. Why should we be involved in frivolous activity? And part of this story there, I believe, is that the key civil servants, and obviously they are very good as a body of experts, but they're not the engineers and scientists that other countries have. Look at Germany. Germany's civil services engineering led. Everything about Germany is based on the quality of their engineering. They take great pride in that. That permeates down, I believe, into their space industry. And there's a national fear or government fear of long-term investment. We know very well all our current problems, or arguably, but I believe, well, definitely down to lack of investment over a long period of time, certainly post-war investment. And that applies to everything across the nation. And one of the, if you like, the key issues that, in fact, this was addressed by, in the middle there, the House of Lords report last year, 2025. They said they appreciate all this issue, lack of investment. And they said that the UK must act now if it wishes to be a leader in the growing space economy. They called that the new space race. In other words, we're not getting the economic benefits that we could be getting from space investment. And the final point there, the current strategy is very much geared to very early economic returns. The tests that the UK Space Agency will always have to apply with their limited funding is they must get an early return to justify investment. They don't have the ability to do long-term investment. More text, but worth just running through. Our ESA budget went down last year. The ministerial, we sadly offered no new money for space exploration, which was very small. and it focused very much on the immediate economic return projects that UK Space Agency could look at. I mentioned about Luca Parmitano flying on Artemis 3 next year, and Rosemary Coogan having a long wait for her ISS flight. We believe that, that's the third point down, there is this UK national space strategy. We believe and the 2025 Space Industrial Plan, we believe that doubling space investment will mean that these will work. The only way they're going to work, the levels that were being talked about in those plans, is by increasing government investment in space. And finally, there is the national security issue. I was saying earlier about the need for sovereignty when it comes to launches, and obviously the reconnaissance satellites and the communication satellites. Skynet is a success, but it's taken years to get to where it has with Skynet 6. We probably need 2 or 3 more of those early on. And that's, if you like, the national security aspect of space investment. Now, what are we up to as a body promoting the increase in UK space investment? We have started lobbying government and Parliament. Over the next few months, we will be talking. Obviously, there's going to be a new set of ministers, no doubt, probably in a month's time. But we have started talking to government. We've been promoting the idea of BIS members talking to their MPs as much as they can. We'd like to think that this issue isn't a political issue. We believe that it's spread across all parties. All parties hopefully will recognise the need for benefits of space investment. So we feel comfortable that we don't need to feel worried that we're promoting a political aspect to space. We produced, internally we produced our website focusing on the campaign, The Flyer, which you probably have seen already floating about, well worth taking away and take a few copies, pass them around to all your contacts. That hopefully encapsulates the arguments for the space investment campaign. We're seeking obviously more publicity as the months go by. This isn't an immediate, if you like, success attempt. It's going to be a slow, gradual campaign over the next few months, which will gradually crank up and spread the message across government and obviously Parliament. The press launch today, sadly, Brian couldn't join us, but we're so appreciative that Dallas has joined us, and in a minute we'll be talking more. And there are 2 other supporters, both astronauts. It's the first Scot in space, Dave Mackay, Virgin Galactic lead astronaut, now retired from Virgin, but still active in terms of his own space company interests. And then finally, on the far right, we have British-born Richard Garriott, good friend of the Society, spoken here a number of times, very grateful for his funding of the BIS Silver Pin Award, which is given to British-born astronauts who make it to orbit, not into suborbit, into orbit. And let's hope down the line we'll be seeing more of those. But so Richard is there, very, very supportive. And we're hoping that the campaign activity will be gradually cranking up. Once government changes have settled, we'll be renewing our efforts to meet with the responsible members. At the moment, it's Liz Kendall as Secretary of State for DSIT. It's also Baroness Lloyd and Lord Valence, the 2 science ministers involved in space, particularly Baroness Lloyd. And we'll be making more contact with them in due course. So, enough from me. I've been journeying on far too long. But we'd like now to welcome Dallas Campbell. Dallas, you're another good friend of the Society. You'll be giving a talk tonight to this Society on your new book. You've already got one on the go, Ad Astra, and the latest one, Space Journal. I have to say, I've had a good look at it. It's visually stunning. It has the art side of space as much as the the technical side. If I might say, your career has covered possibly three areas so far, or maybe more to come. Yeah, of children's. Number one is you are an accomplished actor. Well, my view. I was just saying earlier on that I enjoyed seeing you in Slow Horses a few nights ago on a rerun. But you've got other productions coming through. But also you've got now a career as a presenter. I'd like to think of you as you have that ability without necessarily being a technical PhD level person. But you have the ability, dare I say, the James Burke ability. And we all remember James Burke back in the politics. But you have that ability to communicate to the person on the street, and which is very, very rare, I believe. And you've been involved in BAFTA level productions, Skype Night Live, and the Gadget Show as well. And you've been around. You've covered the Tipping launch as well.
Quite old now.
That photo was only a few weeks ago.
I know, I was looking at it, isn't it? That's some chat. James Burke was always my great hero.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be James Burke. I've been lucky enough to work with James a couple of times.
So, shall we, now it's going to be called a fireside. Fireside.
Deal human today. That's what this feels like.
I'll come join.
So while you're settling down,
Yeah.
why don't I kick us off with a question?
Okay.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot during this campaign is, I remember a TV series called When Britain Ruled the Skies, which was a great series that depicted a lot of the wonderful military and civil jets that Britain built in the 50s and 60s. So we built the Gloucester Meteor, the BAC Lightning. On the civil side, obviously, we designed and built the Comet. These were all trailblazers. This really was a time when Britain ruled the skies. And if you ever saw one of the V-bombers, the Vulcan bomber, if you ever saw that roaring through the sky, that would rip your lungs apart when you watch that. Do you think Britain can ever rule the stars? What do we need to do to put a fire in the belly to get that forward?
And actually, your first slide about Blue Streak, Black Arrow, that's that money. That's caused, I think I'm right, maybe I get this wrong. There was a kind of cost money, it was either Centralites or Concorde. And at the time, in 1971, those satellites, there's not going to be any use for satellites. Then we can see that, then we can think about that. So the money went to Concorde instead.
That's right.
I think.
Yeah, and of course, gradually, less and less.
Yeah.
I think the postal historians, many aerospace projects flying on that.
Yeah.
And terrific TSR sort of in the world league, but the probably just couldn't keep it up.
Yeah. I don't know, your question about can we do it again? The answer is yes. I mean, there's amazing people in the UK. They do a podcast series for the Satellite Applications Test, which is really about Earth observation. In that, well, we've got fantastic scientists, fantastic engineers, and really forward-thinking companies. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on government spending and how much government should be doing as opposed to private sectors. But it does seem like everything takes an awfully long time to do. I mean, you just have to look at... I mean, we're a small country geographically, and we can no longer build a railway. When I'm Prime Minister, I had an idea. I'm going to scrap HS2 and I'm going to have a miniature steam railway from Euston to Inverness. You know, like ones that go around lakes, or kiddie ones, you know, just jump on through sandwiches. Think like that. When I'm Prime Minister, great things are going to happen. I mean, we'll go bankrupt, but it'll be fun.
Well, Dallas for PM instead of...
We should. I mean, again, you sort of said it there. Well, I think there's a lack of... People don't really see space as the important domain that it is. You know, we talk a lot about AI, how that's revolutionising that. And I think our activities in space, all areas of space, are as important and will be dramatic to life on Earth as they are. And of course, they're not separate. Of course, these things can, future of computing and artificial intelligence and space, those three areas are going to radically transform everything. But I don't know. I think, you just talk to people in the street. I'll talk to my sister. When you say space, you think of either Katy Perry, or might think of Neil Armstrong. You get the headlines, but you don't quite understand how it all joins up. And I think that's what we've got to get across with. And it is just space is a great story. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get all that.
Let's explore that. And in terms of yourself, it comes to your mind back to your youth. What actually gripped you about your interest in recording models out of Lego and stuff? What was that building steps from which?
I just grew up at a particular time. I mean, I was born in 1970. So Apollo was happening, and I don't remember Apollo growing up as it was happening. But I'm old enough to remember that's what human beings did. We went to the moon. That was normal. The technology that you're born into is the kind of ground level of normal. And so when I was a kid, going to the moon was normal. And like you say, at that time, space Lego just came out. So we all collected space Lego. And, in the mid-1970s, you had this kind of great plethora of fantastic films being made. I mean, Star Wars is the obvious one, but actually for me, I remember Close Encounters was a really profound cinema experience. Star Trek was on TV. So the message was clear. Space is an interesting place with lots of interesting things going on. And then, and of course, my earliest, I suppose, actual space memory was the landing and the launch of the first space shuttle in 1981, 81. John Young, Bob Griffin. And so that, I remember watching that on TV. But of course, the world was very different. We had 3 TV channels, soon to be 4 TV channels, and radio, and that was it. But there was always that promise that, okay, well, we've done the moon, we've got this great new space plane called the Space Shuttle, although we don't really have anywhere to go. We've got the Mir Space Station and the International Space Station. And Mars was the next step, and then everything kind of slightly ground to a halt. We all sort of felt very disappointed. And actually, people my age, people I'm the same age as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, I mean, I think they had a similar experience to me. Luckily, they've got more money and they've decided to sort of do something off their own fruition. And the reason why they're billionaires and I'm not, because I'm going to build a steam railway to Inverness, which you probably just have to say, and let do things there. Anyway, so, but yeah, I'm an Apollo child.
Now, listen, in your new book with the Tony's about tonight, Space Jump,
yeah,
you go into some of the early thinking of like space philosophy.
Yeah.
And you look at obviously Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah.
But there's more to it. There's Olaf Stig.
Yeah.
And obviously before then, Sienkiewicz,
yeah,
and so on. But is it that showing Brian Buster's here, yeah, one of his favourite expressions of consciousness is we don't just belong here. In other words, it's something to explore.
Yeah. Well, there is just that human thing, right? You look up at the sky and the way that the human brain has evolved, we like to see beyond the present moment. We like to look beyond horizons. We like to look beyond the present moment. So we have a very instinctive idea of what the future is and what lies beyond. And you look up and you see points of light in the sky. Can't help but wonder what they are. You see strange other lights in the sky that kind of move around and they're planets, and we want to know. And also they become destinations. I think Kennedy's illusion of space as an ocean, his famous Rice Stadiums, which was exactly the same way that explorers can look out at an ocean and see a point of land. You want to become a destination rather than just some sort of
Polynesians.
Yeah, we want to. So we see that throughout history. I mean, you go to the Chauvet Caves 17,000 years ago. You look at a picture of a bull painted on a cave wall, and behind it you can see they've applied, and so human beings are pattern seekers. We like to create order out of patterns. So when we look up at the sky, we create order, we create stories. Actually, story, actually, I think that's the word, story. I think that's what I've always been interested in, story. Humans are story actors, and space is just a really good story. It's one of those arenas that just opens up the creative imagination. So you mentioned Olaf Stapleton, who's kind of not very well known in wider circles, science fiction writers, British science fiction writers from Liverpool, writing the 1930s. And I think I remember reading this book, Star Maker, which was this extraordinary journey of astral travel. It starts off standing in this hill and then looks up at the sky and then goes off and explores the universe. It's the most extraordinary, brilliant, peculiar, odd story. And I think Arthur C. Clarke's a good example. He was a great Stapleton fan,
Sure.
as well as, Hugo Gernsback and David Lasser and others who we will know about.
Because Arthur Clarke was very interested in evolution.
Yeah.
And he related all his big messages, the big story, to humans evolving.
It's a great story. Stories is the key of everything.
Yes, and it's an adventure. It's in a cocktail middle adventure.
Yeah.
Deep sea adventure.
So that's interesting that Brian's not here because, of course, he's a mountaineer, he's an adventurer, he's an actor, he's interested in space. It all comes down to good stories, and we love adventure stories. David Mamet, the great playwright who wrote, said that all drama is the quest for a solution. That's all stories. All drama, any story ever written is about somebody wants to forget. And I think that's kind of at the heart of space. It's why we like stories about space, because it kind of represents the magical world in drama. In all stories, again, you always have what we call the inciting incident. You have your protagonist, something happens and it propels them onto their journey and they go somewhere else. So, Wizard of Oz goes from Kansas to Oz, or you go from the real world to the Matrix, or whatever it is. There's always that crossing over to what we call the special. And for the artist, space, there isn't a greater representation of the special world space, because it's replete with mystery, intrigue, and all the things that human brains love to think about.
This goes out in your book, you're always interested in art.
Yeah.
Particularly the idea of an object inspiring, perhaps in children, so forth.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about it, the Soyuz, Soyuz in one of the Russian spacesuit gloves. It's just looking at it, imagine wearing.
The book I'm talking about tonight, it's very much an archaeological book. I'm interested in archaeology. I'm interested in artifacts of things. And I think things that you can touch, hold, look at, are very good catalysts for the human imagination. And often when you go to a museum, which is filled with things and with lots of different things, you're never allowed to touch it. You're allowed to touch it for obvious reasons. There is something about touching things. And actually, you mentioned the spacesuits. I had a Soyuz spacesuit for a while. The kids would just love putting it on. There is something about getting dressed up. It's the Mr. Ben philosophy in life. Mr. Ben would go to the magic costume shop and put on X costume and he'd have an adventure. There's nothing more human and exciting than that. And I always thought, the 1,000th kid that puts on my Soyuz spacesuit that I had will be the one that goes on to event warp drive or whatever it might be. There is something wonderful about objects. And so my book is about objects. It's about torn bits of paper. It's about the backs of envelopes that Arthur C. Clarke had written on. It's about the origins of things, origins of ideas. I wrote a chapter about the clowns. It's not really about the clowns. It's really about Oliver Postgate, his thought process, what he was about. But objects are a really good way of unpicking stories, understanding the origins of things. And also they look nice. I think the ephemera of the past, from a composition point of view, from a material culture point of view, is really interesting.
Painting collection. We have a painting, is it Leonov?
I have a Leonov painting, in Space War. It's actually interesting, I've actually got a copy of, it's 1927, a copy of Amazing Stories. Actually, when it was called a Science Course, changed its name. But 1928 is a picture of kind of space capsule with umbilicals, people floating about. But then you can go even further back to Tsiolkovsky, did many drawings, doodles of bodies floating through the air attached to machinery. And it does sort of tap into that transhumanist idea, that human, as you say, evolution and machine that is suddenly becoming popular again. This idea of man and machine becoming one. And stay, and the famous Tsiolkovsky quotation about mankind leaving the cradle. Sort of like that. But Leonov as well. You had a painting of spacewalk. Leonov did, and of course Leonov did the very first spacewalk. And again, it's that from imagination to reality. The BIS strapline. It is that. It's all these things that I've dreamt about eventually came true. And the cover of my first book had the famous Ed White spacewalk.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So yeah.
You use Chisholm Bonstone, this one, the space painter, who was 50s.
Yeah,
strong.
Yeah. Again, it's just the sort of Bonstone paintings that kind of grace the covers of Collier's magazine are really interesting. I found, and the reason I kind of got into, or I became interested in Bonstone, was I have a copy of Life magazine from 1941. So it's the middle of the war, and Europe's in tatters. America's in tatters. And you kind of go through the pages, it's all pictures of war-torn cities, very serious generals in uniform. And then you get to this middle spread, and it's a spread of colour that Chesley Bonstall did. It's the very first pictures. Of views of Saturn and Jupiter from other planets, from moons. And you have these huge vistas of Jupiter or Saturn, and then you're looking at it from the surface of one of the moons. And if you look very carefully, there are these tiny figures kind of dotted. And again, it's that idea of exploration. I suppose that idea of American manifest destiny as well. This idea that was kind of reflected in the arts of America in the 19th century. These great pictures of America as kind of this is God's realm. And we start to see that in these very early space pictures. So long before we went to visiting these places, they were in our imaginations. And I find sort of history of that really interesting.
One thing in my slideshow I didn't really dwell on, which I feel terribly guilty about. John Zarek is with us in the audience. John, you should be out there. John's been to Thailand. Or the Huygens lander has been to Thailand. And one thing I should have recognised that it's a great UK achievement on part to that mission. Now, where do we stand? I mean, there's been a big debate, BAS around Parker as well. It's robotic versus human. That's in the across the John's mission was pretty jolly good value using robotics. Going to time, extraordinary distance, and seems to discovering a new world, reading nothing about it. So, but what's your answer?
Well, I mean, there is not. It shouldn't be framed as an either or. I mean, obviously, we need robotic exploration with robots, just a lot less demanding needs when it comes to going to different. Crikey, it gets 30 degrees in London, we'll fall apart. Humans we only work in a very limited parameters, environmental parameters. And obviously, satellite technology is amazing, and the wonders of civilization can only exist because of what we've spaced. Civilization will grind to halt. And this is something, but that's a very different thing. Space being useful is a very different thing to space being interesting philosophically or exciting. So it's both. I mean, the astronaut represents the hero of the story. Any good story has a human at its centre. Any movie, any Shakespeare play, so if you want to kind of engage people, the way you engage people is just telling them stuff. You engage people by understanding how stories function. That is about beginnings, middles, and ends, and quests for solutions, and adventures, other worlds, and everything else. And the astronaut is that. And there was something special about the astronaut as well. That's something I've thought about a lot. If we think about stories, big stories, culture, particularly religion, the priest would represent that link between earth and heaven, earth being the normal place and heaven being the special place. The earth would don the special robes, the special costumes, would act as this kind of telephone signal to the heavens. In a way, the astronaut fulfills that same role. They put on the special clothes and they have kind of a mission to, they're the special chosen ones that can cross over into this other realm. And there's something quite profound about that. And humans like it. It's why an astronaut walks into the room. We're like fascinated. We're like, oh shit. I mean, there's 10.
You covered Tim's launch.
Yeah.
And obviously then what?
Yeah.
So is that we need heroes?
Yes, we do need heroes. We do. Humans we love heroes. We love people we can look up to. We love heroes who represent our dreams and our ambitions and ideas. And, heroes come in all forms: football players, tennis players, and scientists and astronauts. Astronauts, particularly because what they do is so extreme. It's been so part of our consciousness so long. And yet there's so few of them. So there's extra specials about the astronaut. And also they wear cool stuff.
Yeah.
They wear like small...
It goes back to the arts.
Yeah. I've always been interested in the spacesuit and the language of the spacesuit, what the spacesuit means, beyond just keeping you alive. It's filled with meaning, semiotics. There is a language of the spacesuit. It's really interesting to see in fiction. R.A. Smith there to the new ones that the SpaceX ones.
What's a filmmaker? Escapes German filmmaker.
Yeah.
Who really focused on that.
Fritz Lang.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Frau Mond was Fritz Lang's. When we think of Metropolis, it's Fritz Lang's masterpiece. But I would argue that Frau Mond, if you want to understand space, and if you want to understand what's kind of going on there, Frau Mond was this great movie that done in 1920s, 20 something. Anyway, the premise is you've got this kind of crazy scientist who believes that the moon is filled with gold, and then there's a Donald Trump character who wants to go to the moon to get the gold. Honestly, you couldn't. Everything that we kind of has been manifest now was kind of predicted in that film. It's a beautiful film. It's really, really good. And, there's lots of predictions, things like spacesuits and gravity and blah, 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 all the things that people were thinking about in the 1920s. But that's always been my favourite predictor of where we're headed. Woman in the moon. Yeah. And Hermann Oberth was the sort of intellectual force, I suppose, behind it. He was the scientific advisor. And of course, Hermann Oberth was the great intellectual force of German rocketry, 1930s, that to von Braun, of course, was his great protege. And whatever became of Werner von Braun. Nothing happened.
Obviously, post-holidays, he's sort of done so.
Yeah, done his bit. It's interesting, actually, von Braun, because, of course, because of the V2, he was a high-ranking Nazi officer. The V2 program, more people died in concentration camps building the V2 than were ever killed by the V2. The V2 was a rubbish, a terrible kind. It had no controls. It was useless. But, of course, that was all slightly forgotten. It was whisked over Operation Paperclip to America and then set up the American space program, the rocket program. That's all.
Yeah. And then there's that clear expression. The Russians had better Germans than...
The Russians had better Germans, exactly. Some of the Russians ended up. But see, the politics of space is fascinating. And actually, post-collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, what happened, the reasons the International Space Station, rather than Space Station freedom. And again, you get into some really interesting politics, which is sort of not dissimilar. And of course, space is, whatever you think, you mentioned that in your talk, space is becoming an increasingly political, a little bit like the Arctic, a little bit like Greenland. If you want to understand why we're all rushing to the moon, look at what's happening in Greenland and the high Arctic. Space is soon to become a domain that is to be fought over.
It's a shame. I mean, the UK has its own space skill. It's like science fiction. They call it UK Space Command.
Yeah. Well, I remember when Trump set up Space Force in America, we were like, ha, ha, ha. And then everyone's got like a space, like, quite, yeah. It's freaking. Yeah. But no, it's still it is still quite Wild West. We still don't quite know what side of the road we drive on, what happens to stuff. You know, go to In Orbit podcast by the Satellite Applications Castle and all your low Earth orbit space.
Let's go back to inspiration.
Yeah.
And you can hear us. John, you famously met, when you're a wee lad, you met Yuri Gagarin. And say what? But did that switch you on to spend same as Dallas was building Lego spacecraft?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, it was my eureka moment. I was at school in North London, and this guy called Yuri Gagarin suddenly became the most famous person on Earth. And that was April 61.
Highgate Centrics.
Yeah, so he embarked on the world tour in July 61, and of course in those days every visiting Soviet dignitary had to go to Karl Marx's tomb in Highgate Cemetery. I was at school just down the road from there. School was cancelled, and a few of us, I mean most people, went off to play with their Game Boys or whatever it was, later 61, I can't remember. But yeah, a small group of us went to Highgate Cemetery to see the great man, and so I stood about 15 feet away from this fellow.
Yeah.
And I found that totally inspirational.
His views, well, certainly was in the Soviet Union with religious fervor. You know, the artwork surrounding space exploration of the time, it's like looking at religious icons.
Oh yes, the art, it's wonderful. And he was greeted really positively here. When if you look at some of the old,
there's statues of it.
I mean, there's a statue, but you know the streets were lined with people waving at his motorcade and everything.
Well, we saw that again with Tim and Principia. When I was doing lots of BBC stuff at the time. And I was at Baikonur with Tim for the launch. But back here in London, the Science Museum kids it had that same feeling. Like, you know, Tim came back, absolute legend. I mean, he is a legend. But and I shouldn't say it, he's all got big head. He represented, you know, he was a focus master.
And you can probably justify the investment in human spaceflight in this country just on the inspirational component.
Well, there was a particular reason. I won't go into the reasons why. I mean, well, again, it's a political thing. It's to do with our investment in ESA.
But he also he fitted the bill, didn't he?
Yeah,
almost from central castle.
Well, there is that point because when Yuri Gagarin was the first. What was an astronaut? You know, we sort of didn't know that. The Apollo first group of American astronauts were all military test pilots. You know, job one, stay alive. Job two, look after your spacecraft, don't crash it. But now it was job one, be good on Instagram and talk to them. You know, the roles evolved and changed. Actually, the public facingness of the astronauts is hugely important. Not just astronauts, prime ministers as well. You know, if you want to understand why Keir Starmer is no longer a prime minister, I think it's pretty obvious.
So a quick question online from Shweta. Shweta says, to increase engagement on the UK space investment campaign, she believes the focus should be on government engagement, on strategies to boost economic returns.
Yeah.
And methods for increasing public mobilisation for our campaign. She'd appreciate any thoughts or ideas you have, especially on the public mobilisation part, that we could possibly champion. So, for example, in the past, we've conducted Eurosnight, which is predominantly an event about celebrating astronauts, but never to the scale like in the US, maybe for obvious reasons. And this is just one such example to bring in outreach and awareness. So she'd love to hear what thoughts you might have on engagement, which could be strategic.
We need to stop thinking of it as a kind of little hobby and actually understand that space. We talk about space in very specific terms in terms of art and philosophy and things, but just the fact that entire civilization is entirely dependent on space. And the thing is, it's not as good a story. It's a story of the astronaut. You know, you tell people that, you know, you pick up your phone, you're using satellite technology every day, and you might go, oh, that's kind of interesting. But I don't know, we need to talk about it. We need bolder projects. We need people, we need politicians to be talking about. You know, George Freeman, who was the science minister, he was great. He used to, you know, talk about space a lot. But we need to talk about it in the same way that we talk about AI as being important and exciting. We need to get out there more. We need more investment in outreach. I mean, I do a lot of outreach. I go around the schools, write books, TV shows. You know, but I suppose we sort of need more of that. And actually, we need a bit more of a joined up approach to that. I think you know, occasionally the BBC will do we'll talk about Artemis, because Artemis is exciting. They're nothing for ages. And then something will happen, we'll talk about this. We don't really know, you know, when Katy Perry went up on Blue Origin, it was sort of seen as a bit of a vanity project. No one really understood why, like what's behind that? Why have Blue Origin built this rocket? Well, they built this rocket as a kind of shop window to something over there, which is much bigger, which is an orbital vehicle that can take mass into space and all the things. But we never really get to that bit of the, we never really get to Act 2. We only ever see certain bits. And I actually think we need to sell the story of space as being something that's not just a fun vanity project, as point out, actually something that is part of all of our lives.
Of course, Elon Musk, many people press these revolutions, price of riches.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, it's a good story. Elon Musk is, whatever you think of Elon Musk, it's a good story. It's a loud story. And he's kind of revolutionized everything and changed everything. He has changed it. You know, the Falcon 9 was changed everything. You know, it's opened this, it's a doorway, it's Hackney Express, but they have built the road on which others hopefully follow. I think like 90% of mass going into orbit is done by SpaceX. This Falcon 9, which is pretty extraordinary. And also, you know, Starship, it's like just the scale and the ambition of these projects is mind. And, you know, we talk about Artemis and going back to the moon, or SpaceX and Blue Origin are part of that architecture. So it's more than just sending Katy Perry to space. Good for Katy Perry. I've got nothing against Katy Perry going to space. She got back down.
We're now, should we move to Q&As from everyone here and online? Should start off there. Jerry, I think, is probably should be second, Jerry.
Thank you. I'm Brad Sherwood from AMSAT UK. We try and do a lot about radio amateurs who've got a passion for space. We had a meeting here in this very room a few weeks ago where we got together with Aris meeting out of radio on the space station, and we have regular contacts for outreach schools. A large number here in the UK, particularly obviously with some people on Green Kipia. We did 10, I think, contacts during the 6 months. So we enjoy doing the educational outreach. My question, my point, is more related to universities and CubeSat. So every country has developed and launched a university-led CubeSat mission. We have not. There. We still cannot. We, as AMSAT, launched a CubeSat 12 years ago. Proud to say it's still working very well, thank you for asking. But we had to launch that as a Dutch spacecraft because we can't afford the operator's license, and we certainly can't afford the third-party liability insurance that our government, and not only this government, before, have required people to have. Somehow that doesn't happen in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Paris. Well, there's a cultural thing, or Denmark, or any other country in the Benelux. How about we go out to Spain? I could name all the countries. There have been probably 1,000 now university CubeSats. Not one. Two, I think we're registered on you. But how can we do something about that?
Well, we need bolder. Okay, if we're talking, if this is we're talking about politics. We need bolder politicians. I mean, we have good politicians and we have good civil servants, but we need to be bolder. We need to talk about it and be less fearful. And Britain. We're obsessed with regulation and rules and insurance, which is why I want to build my miniature steam railways. So, I'm obsessed. Why am I so? It's thinking really. I am bewildered that we cannot build a railway. Like there is something culturally wrong that we can't build a railway. Like it got to the point where they said this is impossible to build a railway from London to wherever we get something right. But it's like it's the kind of satellite Concorde thing. It's like, well, maybe we should have done that.
If you're generous, it's in France and both through the
yeah.
But it could still have a bit more than what I call the cultural, I try to touch it, slideshow. Paul Drosi was very much a technical person originally.
Yeah.
Private company, biology research.
Yeah.
Took that through, became a politician. Almost, the story I've got was that he effectively got typical flight. He set up the UK Space Agency.
Yeah.
And luckily, his successful works carried that on.
Yeah.
So he used more efforts as the brain to appreciate it. So is that it? Is it background education? Is this good education?
Well, maybe. I just think we do need a cultural change. Yeah, we need more bullets. We need more people like Roger Highfield of science who are charismatic and funny and just lovely people and brave and just say what they think. I mentioned George Freeman. George was great. Really champions space mission. I don't know. We just become. Sometimes I think we lack ambition. I think too small. Too in the moment. Politicians generally are too busy firefighting whatever the immediate problem is, rather than actually doing long-term things, which takes us back to Black Arrow. We need to think longer term. We need to understand that space, our activities in space, not in the Katy Perry side of things, but the fact that it is part of our curriculum is hugely important. We've got great, not just as engineers, but in the sort of legal sector, for example. Space law is something British. We're really good at that. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. Let's educate our politicians more. If our politicians don't know enough about space because they're humanities graduate, I'm a humanities graduate. If they're all classicists, let's develop the spirit.
Your humanities graduate. You can communicate.
James Burke worked as a tour guide in France. And someone realised that someone said, "Oh, you can string a sentence together. You're going to present tomorrow as well."
We don't understand technical science or
it's all a story. The Elon Musk. The only reason you know about Elon Musk, it's not big set, but it's great. He understands how to get attention. He's a storyteller. If you want to understand why Donald Trump is president, understand how story works. Understand how human beings oriented. We like simple narratives. And I'm just championing the sorry, Alfred. Right. It's something instant. I'm just going to be my science minister. Well, that's the my prime minister. I think also I'm brilliant.
I think we need to know now is who the real targets are for raising the funding that we need to continue in the space race. It appears that you persuade, or you're trying to persuade minister them, but surely the space agency are the people that actually spend the money.
Yeah.
And as far as I can see, they spend it on themselves. And they don't seem to catch the idea that actually they've got to encourage industry and the rest of the public to allow this spending to happen.
Yeah.
So it's a question really of who is the target.
Well, I think brilliant engineers. If we get a launch, Saks Ford and British rocket companies and great Scottish space company, all these great companies that are here, if they start to do things, then the politicians are always one step behind. They then go, let's see what's happening. So we can't just expect politicians to do things in a vacuum. This won't happen. Elon Musk, if you want that example, whatever you think of Elon Musk, he just sort of did it of his own back, and now everyone's following. So you kind of need a bit of boldness. And good. Yeah.
An important point. We don't really have a space station anymore.
No, it's the sort of
to civil service. We have a 6-year period when we had an independent space agency run by people who understood the industry,
Yeah.
and our space industry rocketed.
Yeah.
And to the point a Canadian told me he thought the UK was the best place in the world to do space.
Yeah.
Now we have an expanding space industry in the world, and we're static.
Yeah.
That's the first point. Second point, which I find hilarious, is that nations in NATO have claimed specialisations to spread the political work.
Yeah.
The British government claim that space is a UK speciality in NATO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humans are complicated. We need to stress and we need to sell the fact that space is a realm of opportunity, not some luxury. That is the point. It's something we all know already. And then a couple of good resources that I want to point people to. In Orbit, which is a podcast that I do, which is very much about Earth observation. Alice Bunn, who lots of you I'm sure will know, does a podcast called Calm Mind, and she always has really interesting guests on talking about this. She had Hasseltine on the table about his technique. So I pointed to that. I'd also pointed to the Royal Society's report, Space 2075. It's a really good overview of where we are. Came out last year, where we are, where we're going, sort of 50 years where we should. It's a really good resource for it. That's just
Yeah. But one thing we haven't sort of touched on is it's not just the BIS who are worried about this lack of government investment. The Royal Astronomical Society, recently, the celebrity astronomers coming out in favour of the support, the astronomy. In fact, John, so keep coming back to John, you're probably fully aware of the lack of science and astronomy funding that's being cut, big cuts, 20% cuts, I think. So in other words, we're talking to a similar issue.
Well, that's the kind of science I I mean, it's the world is about. It's going to go through a massive change. I mean, a massive technological change. But we're going through a massive political change. And I am concerned the fact that what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Russia, and how that's going to play out over the next 5 years, how it's happening in China. It's very, very uncertain times. So
It holds back investment.
it holds back investment. Everyone's worried about spending money, spending more money on defence. That's the conversation. I think. And obviously, defence and space are very closely linked. So yeah. Sorry, I was rambling. On. So turning into an old man rambling.
Oh, so the same lines with that earlier.
Yeah.
Just some updates that might be interesting, because I'm working a lot with Imperial University. So Imperial at the moment have got Space Solar. That's been funded over 10 million plus.
Yeah.
Dr. Kate, who's just sent her box of cancer up to space, using astronauts came back down, which is very interesting. So we're kind of leaders in space medicine.
Yeah.
Even though the suitcase is pretty small.
Yeah.
Space Solar I just mentioned, which is very interesting, because they're now looking for sites where they can move energy from the sun into space by microwave
and send it to a ground station.
Yeah.
We're never going to have one in the UK.
Well, in my Herman Ober book of space, 1930 something, we talk about space solar panels. I think space solar panels is going to happen. I think that, I mean, obviously, you know, I mentioned AI. AI only works if you've got a lot of edge. And so the only way to do that is probably space solar panels. But also the other big area that Britain should get involved in is in orbit manufacture, making things in orbit.
I just was going to mention Seraphim Space.
So, yes,
Have now been on FTSE 100.
yeah,
Nearly 20 to 30 billion invested.
yeah.
British aerospace and European aerospace.
Exactly. There is gold in them there. There is, and that's the point. Goes back to flowering arms with what there is gold in the moon. There is a reason why there is a new space race opening up, because there's a lot of money to be made. We need to stop thinking of space as a luxury. It's kind of space, isn't it fun? And actually something that is where the big bucks are.
No, it's Chris Newland's Space Scottish based firm that you mentioned before. Long story short, there's a frustration, going back to the question before about who you point the question to, because there's ever-changing secretaries of state, there's ever-changing prime ministers, and priorities of budgets, etc. as well. But to go back to one of the first questions that can Britain become great again in space? I think it can. And fundamentally, one of the examples I would use, and just that was interested in upstream side to understand what this AYE, the Scottish I, is phonetically correct. Well, we control training data for the next generation of AI models. Britain controls that. It's a solid capability. We have the ability to see the world in the now and do digital twins, and we control that capability. The Union Jack replacing all space-derived data can do that this year. It's just getting the right conversations with the right people. We have the intelligence. You don't have to be classically trained. I do have a degree, but fundamentally, important story, to your point, Alice, is really, really important. How we sell the story, how we tell the story. We have to be diplomatic.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, geopolitically, we need to get front foot with the computers. And I think the fear I have is there's so much turmoil in our country just now. We just need to have that focus, and we can do it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, politically, we're a mess. You know, what are we up to? How many prime ministers in the last 5 years? We're about to have a dozen prime minister. So we have to thank them face to be honest. And we are going through a really difficult political. I don't know how it. I haven't gotten to this mess. She said from the outset, look, I'll be prime minister. Everything will be fine. Amazing things will happen. So I don't know what Ange learned.
Jerry's been patient waiting.
Hang on. University again. I've got a couple of points which I'll try and roll into one. The first one is a bit negative. I'm not a negative person, so I'm not too negative. But I, going back 25 years or more, I can remember sitting in meetings like this. Whether it's UK space, the trading body, the Royal Astronomical Society, the Royal Aeronautical Society, all sorts of people have done initiatives like this. And frankly, none of them would work. So, although, our position is probably better now in space than it was when I started as a research student, when, it was frankly pathetic. And I'm pleased that somebody mentioned Grayson, who I think has been important, but the two people actually who I think are most important were Lord Sainsbury and David Willits, who incidentally, neither of whom had scientific or technical background, both were absolutely humanities or classics, whereas of course the one prime minister we had who had scientific background was dreadful. Anyway, so that sounds a bit negative that we've done all this before and it hasn't really had an impact. Maybe this time it will. But what I think is terribly interesting is if we look at Europe and the history of European space, it really is the Franco-German system that has made ESA, that has made Europe, a significant space. And they are comparable countries to us, broadly speak. Why on earth is it that their approach is so different? I don't know the answer, but it really is. And it spans the right or left in politics. There just seems to be the vision and the ambition and the positivity.
Yeah, you're
We
right.
just don't have here.
That's the three words: vision, ambition, positivity. That we don't. We've becoming a bit hanged on about such things, which we become short-termists. And I think we need inspiring politicians. We need politicians who are inspiring. We need inspiring business leaders. We need inspiring scientists and engineers, inspiring astronauts. We need inspiring television people who.
But do France and Germany have that?
Well, I just think that
They consistently are spending, as 50 years, twice more.
well, maybe they have more vision. Maybe they have more. They can see further than we can.
My view, touched on this in the slideshow, is that one, it's structure, possible structure.
Yeah.
They had a more of a CAM-driven structure. But building TGV railways
Yeah.
through France. But our HS2 story is there, and they just did it, in a year.
Yeah.
Construct. And the system allowed it. People's attitude, but
We can do it, like Terminal 5. We landed it on budget and on time, or the Nazi bomb around. Right,
Quite a lot more.
yeah.
And they've been helping them.
Those guys.
Eat those guys up, so come in.
Yeah, no. We can do it. Yeah. My favourite story of French engineering when they built the Eiffel Tower during the French what's it called? Exhibition of probably the year. They were going to make it into a fairground ride. They had a capsule at the top that they were going to drop and spin it on, and then it would land in a kind of lake that they could build. I was like, that would be much. If they'd done that. But I remember when I was a kid when the Channel Tunnel was being built, and I remember on Tomorrow's World, actually, they showed that these are the models that we're really going to do this one, and it's going to be a massive bridge. Or this one, it was going to be a bridge, tunnel, bridge, or just a tunnel. And I was like, please don't pick three, please pick one of the massive bridges, it's going to be excellent, it's going to be awesome. And then they picked the boring. I was disappointed. Well, yeah, we do need a bit of ambition. We need a bit of bavavoom,
long-termism.
bit of long-termism, bit of getting rid of some of the kind of British pessimism. It's a bit like in the football, in the sort of 1990s. Really pessimistic about English football and penalties, how bad we were at penalties, blah blah blah. Seems a bit more optimism. We sort of turned a corner there actually, and obviously England's doing well in the World Cup. But just that kind of negativity that kind of existed, which is a very British thing. And it's part of what makes us funny. It's part of what makes Britain culturally a great nation. I always measure a nation by their sitcoms. You look at the British sitcom, you look at kind of Steptoe and Son, it's about this father and son trapped in this hideous relationship. One of them has ambitions to leave and do great things. But those ambitions will ultimately crumble to dust. Ha, ha, ha. We love that. There is something funny about that. It's very different to Europe. In America, in a sitcom, the kind of protagonists have ambitions which are kind of realised. It is part of our psyche.
The acceptor should have space condition.
Well, Steptoe, he always wanted to get out. He wanted to better himself. He wanted to get away from this. He couldn't. But I'm saying with Faulty Towers, there is that frustration of knowing one's place and being trapped, not being able to, which gives and you mentioned Yes Minister once. That it had our pessimism has its cultural benefits in the world of sitcom, perhaps not in the world of space travel.
Yeah.
Well, there have been a couple of mentions of travelling on to home and over. Sarah Harvard actually read Oprah's work and she wrote Frau Imond as a result of that.
She's the actress in it.
Yes.
She was the main, she was the animal.
And she wrote it, and it was a nice completing of the circle, but Oberth was involved as a technical consultant for the film.
Yeah.
He actually wanted to launch the rocket as a publicity stunt for it.
He did. No, it was the first liquid fueled rocket.
No.
Yeah.
No, that was a question. Robert Cobb.
No. Sorry, I pointed at you. That was later.
He wasn't able to actually launch a rocket for the film.
No, that's not much of it, but he had the rock.
Yes. But the film, being silent, had captions now.
Yeah.
And one of them, before the takeoff, came up saying 10 seconds to launch. Another, which said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, lift off. And the intention was to increase the tension for the audience.
Yeah.
But what they actually did, of course, was to invent the count.
Well, this is what I, it's all story. It's all how to get people's attention, how to force the narrative, how to change the narrative, how to, if you want to, but
speaking of getting people's attention, so I've given presentations on space, I've been promoting space in my first space talk 57 years ago.
Wow.
I realised I've actually been doing this for longer than Patrick Moore presented The Sky at Night. Years can be alone. And there's been two things that are important about. So there's the public's view that space is incredibly expensive and takes so much money, whereas in fact, at the height of Apollo, they were spending 4% of GDP in that, but now NASA spends half of 1%. The amount spent on housing, social security, and everything is 20 to 40 times more, and defense, well, way up, not that. We really need to change the public's perception of this, and they also need to be better informed of the benefits of space. When I give presentations in schools on careers, I say there are so many things you can do that have connections with space. And especially when I'm doing this around this time of year, I point out that even tennis rackets now are being modified and being enhanced based on space technology, which is stuff.
Well, I mean, the list of why space is useful is going.
But as for this campaign, can it achieve something? Well, some years ago, there was a question of whether Britain was going to say, yes, we will be involved in the European Space Agency Aurora project. And there was going to be a decision at the European Council of Ministers. And I asked, well, what's being done to make sure that we give the right answer? And the response was, well, nothing. I said, well, I'll do something. So I set up the UK for Aurora campaign. And I produced a downloadable postcard so people could download this, print it out, would be paid for, they fold it apart, stick it together. So on one side, it's addressed to the House of Commons, they put in their MP's name, and on the other side, they write why they believe that we should do this. So it wasn't a blanket statement, because people want to receive individual messages from people. And I found out a fair bit later that if an MP gets 3 messages on the same subject, they will take interest. If they receive 7 messages,
they will take action. And so at the announcement, when Lord Sainsbury said we were going ahead with this, he knew of my campaign and he looked down at me in the audience when he said public opinion played a definite asset in the decision.
Well, that's exactly
This campaign can actually achieve.
public opinion is that politicians, all they do, all their job is to go along with public. So we have Tim Peake did a lot to promote space and Britain, and things like that. It's unfortunately, the Cornwall launch and other things.
Yeah, but that will happen with space because somebody said we cannot set space is hard. We do it because it's hard. And that's a challenge.
It's a great speech. I just go back to that. It was written by Ted Sorensen in a speech. It's one of the great pieces of rhetoric. If you want to understand how to change people's opinion, understand how to write a good speech. And that Ted Sorensen, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. It's so good.
But anyway, if I could perhaps just say a little bit more about what the campaign is doing. As I was saying earlier, it's a long-term campaign. We know the next year or two will be a strange twice. But if we keep putting the message out, people start to us, and John through the Royal National Society, that message gradually, it's a subliminal thing, it's not saying the public area, and obviously government will hear it as well. So we will keep up pressure.
Yeah.
When we haven't mentioned the current online petition, we're running a petition. Now, very important that audience, friends, family, contacts do go onto that site. It's on our website. You've set it up very, very nicely. I think it's referred to in the flyer. There's So please, we've got till middle of November. Please, everybody, go for it and go on that petition. And it may not, we're going to achieve quite a figure of 10,000 to get recognition, but the bigger it is, the better. It's the message. Max, you've been very good.
I know that's okay. Yeah, so you mentioned briefly ISEN, and all the services in assembly manufacturing. So just to put a damper on things today, so there's been last year it's now like made 300,000 collision avoidance points. That's one every 2 minutes. So while we might be setting, it's about 40. They've got 10,000 operation satellites. They get to 100,000 doing maths, getting into seconds, put AI data centers in space, you can use the abstractions of seconds to these points. So is that sustainable? So the UK spends about 3% on ISAT, and less than 1%, I think about 1% on space sustainability. So is that an option for you? This seems to be like an opportunity. In the UK is very good at sustainability, it's more hard, but I wish to sound kind of roasted bastards. Space sustainability is more hard-wired into now to people.
Yeah.
And so is that an opportunity that the UK could be real world leader? So at the European level, eco days, eco design, ISAN is a real growth area.
When I'm talking in schools, that's always question one. Sustainability is always there, and I think you're right. I think it's a great opportunity. I think law, I think the legal stuff in space, which is obviously a massive, the old Outer Space Treaty, which is not fit for purpose anymore. And of course, you've got the new Space Magna Carta. And so there's sort of legal frameworks within space. Globally becomes more important thing. I think it's an area, and I think sustainability is so it's a really good idea.
That's what it's a fraction of 1%.
Yeah, that would lead to, we're already hearing about data centers in space as well, saving power, probably low carbon point.
Yeah.
But there's power generation you mentioned.
Yeah, you're right. Data centers in space will happen. And I think power generation as well is going to be. It's been a science fiction thing for a long time in power generation space. I don't know, that's just all the kind of people I speak to, it seems to be, oh, that's actually going to be a thing.
Yeah, and that's the
Oh, aren't we
positive.
going to fry birds that go through the microwave? That's the question. They're like, oh, am I going to get this?
It's half the power of some.
It's like, but again, it's a story thing. I did a program about hydrogen cars. And that was everyone's question. It's like, oh, but if I'm going to put hydrogen in my car, aren't I going to blow up? Like, you put petrol in. Right? Any idea how flammable petrol is? You know, it's like, it's how do we change the narrative? There's a guy in America called Donald Trump who's really good at controlling the narrative. And if you shake your head about why is Donald Trump prime minister, president, I mean the guy's dead, but he's really good at understanding what people want to hear, how to dominate the media. Say how to Elon Musk, that Elon Musk chap, yeah,
Here's a couple of points.
sorry, I said dick. I shouldn't say that.
You shouldn't have said that.
And then
Brian Blessing said that.
what he said was,
We'll edit that out.
but I mean, Trump is, but my God, I mean, even his infinity pool, you know, that pool he's building, it became like the main headline for like 2 weeks.
A couple of questions online, a couple of observations perhaps. Richard says a point for Dallas and Nick is that the problem we need to overcome is that Whitehall is staffed with technically and scientifically illiterate people in general, and they have absolutely no clue that their day-to-day life is dependent on space technology. That's unlikely to change, and educating them would be like trying to explain Einstein's special theory of relativity to a herd of cattle. So maybe if they could be replaced by AI, we might see an improvement in decision-making.
Point. I don't disagree with it. And we do need more scientists and engineers. And I think historically, as you said, we've had one prime minister, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But it goes back to the C.P. Snow famous two cultures, sort of science or art. I'm not a scientist. I don't have any science qualifications. But I get it. Like, you know, the science programs are. The reason I make science programs is because I know a lot about science. So I understand how to tell a story. I understand the process of film and television making. And that's it. And it just so happens that science is a really good story. Space is a really good story. And it's the same as James Bond, you know, or anyone else. If you go to the BBC Science Unit, actually, well, in the senior levels, it's all humanities graduates. It's all people who studied English and history at university. And then, of course, you know, you get scientists and researchers. But fundamentally, that's what it's about. So it's not about, you don't have to, it's not like you need scientists in order to know that science is a good idea. I know science is a good idea. And I'm a humanities graduate.
Sorry, I think guys on LinkedIn, you've got a web page on LinkedIn. I'm just saying the VIS.
We do, yeah. We have a very good. We do.
There's so much stuff that's free on LinkedIn. Yeah, can really help raise a lot of money. Well, I've raised millions on LinkedIn.
Well, give it to us.
So Dallas, you've told us, I think one of the important messages you've given us today is that story making and storytelling is all so important. And in fact, there's a question online from It is.
You want to change things, you have to understand how audiences work, how human brains work, how politics works. Politics is a story. It's all it is. It's the news story. You know, it's once you understand that, then you can start to change things.
Alan wants to know, he says people in this country were inspired by science fiction programs like Operation Luna on the radio, Fireball XL5, Thunderbirds, Doctor Who, and numerous other great British science fiction works.
Yeah.
Do you think we need more inspirational British science fiction on TV?
And I'll tell you the program I want to make. I've been trying to do it for a while. And some of you of a certain age might remember Doomwatch.
Yes, yeah.
So Doomwatch was a group series, and it was about this kind of group in Whitehall, sort of the secret kind of civil service group who would investigate technological problems that were happening, right? scientists go on the road over here, and there was this sort of crack group. We go and solve crime, solve problem. In 1999, I was acting we did a featured version of Doomwatch with working title films, and it was the original writers, Kit Adler and who else it was? Jerry Lewis, Jerry Springer. I can't remember. It wasn't Jerry Springer. We did it. It was really good, and the scenario was dodgy Russians had built a black hole in a particle accelerator, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, we saved the day. And I thought, if ever there was time to really do Doomwatch, you're going through this extraordinary tech revolution where the story is generative AI going to take over the world, and all those kind of horror stories which we love because they just make good stories. I want to do Doomwatch again. So I'm going to try and get a new series of Doomwatch fit for the 21st century.
Play it too. There used to be Toby was the hero.
Toby Quist, and who was played when I did it. Toby was played by Eddie Shoestring. Trevor, yeah. And weirdly enough, I played a character. Okay, so this is 1999. I played a character who was the computer whiz, called Brian Cox. Weirdly, I'm just like, and so it's really funny actually, because The Matrix had just that same year, or maybe the year before. And so all I wanted to do was have a big long black cloak like Keanu Reeves, and I did. I got it. So I wear a lot of black and have glasses. And actually, weirdly enough, my character had a sort of futuristic computers, which were basically AI agents. They were sort of angels projected onto a screen with angelic names that I can't remember. Michael Sheen, the actor, did the voice of my angels. And it's worth. I think it was pretty terrible, but it's haunted. They do watch Winter Angel or Winter Angel. From each discover. Yes, but there's a good series to be done. I think BBC are going to talk to them. Yes, sorry, this. Yeah, sorry, we should probably start. Sorry, bang up. Winter.
John Dex, be honest. Just slightly contrary. It's striking that you haven't seen any, but Doomwatch was extremely pessimistic about science and technology. I remember it in its impact. And I worked in, at the time, I would actually, I think it's while I was actually working on a very in the space industry. And everybody who watched it, this is really putting people off science and technology. It's frightening them.
But that's because sci-fi requires baddies.
Yeah.
For its function.
It was all about baddies. It was
Like when you said, you needed goodies and bads. And unfortunately, you're right, it was a little bit. Science fiction is really about science. All good science, like you said, all science fiction is just about drama. It's just about humans doing what humans do. That's quite critical. It's been really interesting. Yes, I got Blake 7, but Blake 7 was good. Well, Blake 7 was much more space. Doomwatch, I remember there was an episode called Plastic Eaters. Would you remember Plastic Eaters where someone invented everything that was made of plastic suddenly started to be wrong? It was aircraft. It was a really good idea. Why we didn't do much with AI and bringing samples back from asteroids onto Earth was ripe for chaos. Science, space, heads. Human Cox. I'm sorry, it was I got it wrong. It was Hugo Cox's name.
So Dallas and Nick, thank you very much for a really engaged conversation. I'm sorry that Brian Blessed was not able to join us. If he were here, I think he'd remind us that he's always had the ambition to get to Mars. He wanted to go to Mars since he was a child, and he was firm in his belief that he was going to get there. Age 90, I'm sure that belief has not disappeared.
Quite right.
That's not a job.
I'm sure he's going to go. I mean, he's going to the space station. He's done his training. He's ready. Let's get Brian up to the up to the space.
So we wish Brian well in his absence. So Britain has been great in the past, and if we think about it, the first thing that touched the surface of Titan was something built by Britain, and blow me down if the bloke who led that team isn't sitting in the audience here today. So Britain has been great, is great, and will be great again.
We're only great because of the people. You're only great because of the people in the country. We've got great people. We've got great companies. We've got a great space. We did a great space industry. We've got great space ambassadors. I mentioned people like Alice Bunn. There's no reason why we should be leading. We should be much more ambitious. That's all I.
We should. We should. Thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you.
And
you can hear it second half.
Thank you very much.